Hi everyone, my name is Haley and I'm 16 years old. Tell me, have your parents ever made you do something that you really didn't want to do? Like take music classes or do sports? For some reason, all moms and dads think they know what's best and that they know what their children need. And mine, unfortunately, are no exception. They simply refused to see that my real talent lay somewhere else entirely. Subscribe to the channel, and I'll tell you my story. Perhaps you'll find it useful someday. My parents have always been big sports fans. Dad was a professional swimmer, and Mom was engaged in equestrian sports. So, when I was 6, my dear parents brought me to the gym for the first time. They dreamed of their daughter becoming an Olympic champion in gymnastics. Of course, I was just a kid at the time, so I didn't really have my own opinions yet, and I didn't mind. I just did whatever my parents wanted me to do. And to be honest, for the first few years, I really enjoyed it. I quickly learned how to do almost all of the exercises, and I got really flexible. My parents couldn't get enough of my success. But as I grew, I got to thinking, do I even want to be a champion? Or do gymnastics at all? One day, I was walking home after school. I saw a group of people while passing by a construction site. They were doing something really interesting, jumping and practicing a lot of stunts. I got curious, so I walked up to them and asked them what they were doing. They explained to me something called parkour. Well, you probably already know what that is, but that was the first time I'd ever heard the word back then. After they explained it to me, I immediately wanted to try doing it. The guys there laughed at me and said I had a lot to learn before I could start parkour. However, I said that I would show them something unforgettable and jumped on one hand for a few meters. You should have seen their faces. Of course, they immediately surrounded me and asked where I'd come from. And since then, I began to do parkour and hang out with those guys almost every day since. I loved doing stunts with them. My gymnastic training came in really handy. So handy, in fact, that in a few months, I'd learned to do almost everything they could, and I became even better than they were. I finally found something that I really enjoyed. But when I opened up to my parents about it, they looked horrified, and they said I was crazy. Gymnastics is a real sport, and what you're talking about is some foolishness, my mother shouted. You're really upsetting us, Haley. Important competitions are coming up soon. Focus on them, said my father. I went to my room, and I felt extremely hurt. Why were they getting to decide what was best for me? I wanted to choose what I wanted to do myself. But, of course, I also wanted my mom and dad to be proud of me and all my achievements. So that's why I started practicing for my gymnastic competition and doing parkour with my friends after that. One day, I was practicing a really cool jump between rooftops. Everything was going great, and I pushed off, did a flip, and I landed. But at the last moment, I suddenly lost my balance and I fell onto my shoulder. Something popped and I felt a horrible pain. The guys ran up to me at once and they helped me up. There was something wrong with my arm, so they rushed me to the hospital. After a short examination, the doctor told me that I dislocated my shoulder. It wasn't anything terrible, and they immediately put it back in place and put me in a sling. The doctor said I should avoid contact sports for a week. I didn't say anything, but at that moment, I realized the gymnastics competition was in 2 days. And when I got home, I was sure in for a ride. And I was right. When my parents found out what had happened to me, they were furious. My mother shouted that I was irresponsible and didn't appreciate anything they'd done for me. And my father added regretfully that my teenage rebellion would ruin my entire sports career. I didn't tell them that I hadn't wanted to do gymnastics for a long time already, and I wasn't ever planning on becoming an Olympic champion. I wore the sling for a couple of days, and I didn't exercise, just like the doctor told me. And finally, the day of the competition came. I took off the sling and, my arm didn't hurt. Everything seemed to be fine. I changed my clothes, and I started warming up. And when they announced my turn, I went to the bars without hesitation. I jumped up, and I started my routine when... All of a sudden, a sharp pain shot through my shoulder during one of the moves. I couldn't get a good grip and fell on the mats. My shoulder hadn't healed yet, and my injury was making itself very well known again. long story short, my score was horrible and I failed out of the competition. When I got home, I put on the sling again, and my parents didn't even scold me. They were sad and silent. Only at dinner did my mother say that she was disappointed in me. "You can do whatever you want. You won't achieve anything anyway," she added. Her words made me angrier than I'd ever been. I replied, "Fine, then I'm done with gymnastics. You won't have to feel ashamed of me anymore." I went to my room and I decided I wouldn't talk to them for the rest of the week. I spent the next few days resting my shoulder and thinking. On the one hand, I was really glad that I didn't have to do gymnastics anymore because I didn't enjoy it. But on the other hand, I still wanted to prove to my parents that I could find my own way to success. And that's when I decided the only thing that would make me famous was parkour. As soon as my shoulder stopped hurting, I went back to my parkouring friends. I desperately needed to catch up on what I'd missed during my absence and keep up practicing. So I started practicing every day, and really quickly I was able to get back in shape. At some point, we started filming our stunts on our phones and making whole music videos. It was actually pretty cool. I suggested making a YouTube channel and uploading them there. It would certainly help us get noticed, and from that, we could become famous. None of us doubted that we could do it, and soon we had our own channel. We posted a couple of new videos a week, and soon, people began to subscribe, and our videos got the first likes. And just like that, several months passed. I leveled up my parkour skills and shot more and more videos with my friends. But for some reason, our channel stopped growing, and we still weren't all that famous. My parents had given up on me a long time ago, and didn't care what I was doing with my time. That hurt, because I still wanted them to be proud of me. One day, we were hanging out in the backyard of one of my parkouring friends. It was hot, and we were trying to cool off by the pool, lazily throwing a ball at each other. Someone took out a bow and arrow, and suggested we start competing in accuracy. I was lying on a deck chair and watching the guys try to hit the target. And then, I got what seemed like a fun idea. I went up to them and asked, "Can any of you do this?" And with those words, I did a handstand, clutched the bow with my toes, and asked them to help me pick up an arrow with my other foot. Using only my legs, I drew the bowstring and I shot. To my surprise, I hit the bullseye. My friends were absolutely thrilled. They surrounded me and told me I had a very unusual talent. I was just glad I could liven up the party. A week passed and I'd already forgotten about my unique stunt with the bow, when suddenly, one of the guys came up to me at one of our practices and said he wanted to show me something. It turned out that he'd filmed me at the pool party, and he'd posted the video onto the channel. And below the video, some user had been asking me to contact them. Apparently they had a really tempting offer for me. I was surprised. I mean, who could this be, and what did they want from me? I decided to take a chance, and I called the number they'd left in the comments. A woman picked up the phone and said that she was a producer of a popular talent show. She was so impressed with my skills that she personally was suggesting that I take part. Wow, I finally was getting my chance to become famous. Of course, I agreed, and I ran to tell my parents the good news. But when I told them I was going to take part in the show, my mom and dad remained indifferent. My mother said that it was all nonsense and they'd expected me to do something completely different with my life. I felt even more hurt than before, and I decided that I would just have to prove them wrong at all costs. I started practicing for the show. To do that, I asked a friend for a bow and arrows and to set up a target in my backyard. I had to practice a lot to learn how to shoot with my feet without help. But after a few days, I got pretty good at it. And then, it was show day. I was given a special stage costume and props for my performance. The audience was huge, even bigger than at my gymnastics competition. Moreover, this show was going to be televised on a major TV channel. I really was going to be famous. Finally, it was my turn, and I made my entrance. I was kind of worried, but I came out, and I shot 5 arrows with my feet. They all hit the target. After each shot, the audience applauded wildly, and at the end of my performance, they went crazy. Even the jury gave me a standing ovation. And at that moment, I was happier than I'd ever been before. Probably the happiest person in the world. It was such a shame that my parents had refused to come. They said it was just an ordinary hobby and it had nothing to do with professional sports. After that show, I became an even bigger star in our parkour group. When they showed me on TV, I became the most popular person in town, and I had achieved it all myself with my unusual talent. But that's not all. One evening, I got a call from a representative of a world-famous circus show. He said he'd seen my spectacular performance on TV, and he'd been extremely impressed. He offered me a job in the circus, and we'd be touring all over the world. I couldn't believe my luck. After all, something like this was what I'd been dreaming of my whole life. I'd be famous and have millions of fans all over the world. I immediately ran to tell my parents. Now they would surely admit that I had succeeded. But after they listened to me, my mother again said indifferently, "Haley, you could have been a world-famous athlete. That is something to be proud of. Instead, you'll be a clown in an ordinary circus." And again, my parents said that I could do whatever I wanted. But for some reason, for the first time throughout all of this, I didn't feel angry with them. I started thinking about what they were really saying. Were my parents right? Or maybe they just didn't understand what was popular these days. I don't know anymore. Whose side are you on? Please tell me in the comments down below. I'm really lost.